Spire Global, ticker symbol SPIR, just released earnings yesterday morning, and let's talk about it. Today, as of recording, I think it hit a high of 1192, so that's pretty good, right? I think it rose some like 10-15% as of the earnings. So what happened in the earnings that kind of created this demand for the stock? So first of all, I have these notes that I just wrote, and then here's just this transcript of Spire Global's Q4 earnings call. Now, one of the main reasons I assume it went up, because it's such a small float and no one really knows about it, is you do see some increased price targets, right? From 14 to 16 and from 9 to 12. And this person, I think someone remains a hold at $19 or something like that. There are institutions that are recommending the stock. Let's talk about Spire Global. So this earnings call, all it really did, in my opinion, is it did reiterate a lot of what I already thought, or a lot of what I already spoke about, being the tailwinds and being the I guess the position that Spire Global is in. And it really just reiterated my thesis, and also gave a few more insights into where the business is right now. And that's basically what I thought it was. So let's summarize this entire earnings call. If you don't want to watch this video, just look at these notes. Currently, they have $81.8 million of cash on hand and no debt. So this is really, really important in this high rate environment, where if you listen to the FOMC meeting that Jay Powell just did yesterday, then this is really important, right? Because if you expect rates to remain higher, or even they were even considering raising rates, if you're a really successful company or you have a really good product, if you have a lot of debt on hand, that debt might kill you. So this is definitely really, really important, especially since Spire Global operates in a business that requires a lot of high initial investment, right? You have to create the actual satellite in order to produce your product, right? Which is gathering data. Next thing, what type of satellite does Spire Global do, right? What is their type of satellite? So unlike the likes of, like, let's say Maxar or Black Sky, who do looking satellites, right? They just take pictures and it's imagery satellites. Spire Global's main bread and butter is listening satellites. These listening satellites, they basically just look for radio frequencies and then they gather that as data. So why do I think that this is so much more interesting than ocular satellites or imagery satellites? Is imagine you have a house, right? Would you want your house to have a 24-hour security system or a 12-hour security system? Obviously, the 24-hour security system. So the problem with imagery satellites is it's basically off half of the time, right? In 24 hours, about 12 of those hours, the sun is not shining and you can't see anything. Versus listening satellites, you can literally listen 24 hours a day. So that's something really important. And listening also allows you to see different data that you can't really see in ocular satellites. Additionally, ocular satellites or looking satellites, I feel like there's a lot more competition with these imagery satellites than there is in listening satellites. So again, that's basically what Spire Global's main bread and butter is. It's the low Earth orbiting satellites, or LEO satellites. I think one of the coolest things about Spire Global's business is, I've talked about this in multiple videos, how a first mover's advantage is not a moat. There's this concept of a fast second, where basically, even if you have a first mover's advantage, that doesn't necessarily make you the best. You can even take into account, it might be somewhat controversial, but OpenAI versus Claude, right? A lot of people prefer Claude more. A lot of people prefer Gemini more. No one really prefers Grok more, but what I'm saying is that even if you're the first, that doesn't necessarily make you the best. But what's special about Spire Global's business is it kind of turns their first mover's advantage into a moat. Because what they do, how their business is they basically contract with companies who are looking for a specific type of data. And then Spire Global will create these satellites for these companies and then launch them into space. Now, Spire Global has access to a different type of data set than what they previously had, because they just made the satellite for the specific customer. Now, new customers that want to use Spire Global's data, they have access to this other customer's set of data. Does that make sense? So as Spire Global gets more and more customers and they get more and more business, then Spire Global has a ever expanding type of amount of data or amount of proprietary data that they can share with their customers. First of all, there's two things that you can kind of imply from this. The first thing is, as time goes on, the margins will increase because you no longer have to go through the initial investment of actually creating the satellite, building the satellite, and like designing it, all these things, and shipping it, and like launching it, not shipping, launching it into space, because you have this data now. So when a customer needs that data, they just have to hire Spire Global, and they don't even have to hire, they just ask Spire Global for that data, and then Spire Global will give it to them, right, for a price, obviously. But the other thing is that's really important is that when Spire Global is ramping up, you do have to account for that initial investment in that satellite, where the time in which they're building the satellite is the scary part, because it does require a lot of initial investment. That's why I said this $81.8 million of cash on hand is very important. Not having debt is very, very important, because if you do run into this problem, let's say you built a satellite incorrectly. That happened before, right? Satellite, or Spire Global built a satellite incorrectly. I forgot who their customer was, but then all the initial investment in that satellite just went to poop, right? Because it's unusable. So having this cash buffer is really important for getting those satellites up to space, and then after those satellites are up to space, then their margins will increase substantially. And that's why I say that Spire Global's first movers advantage actually is in some way an actual moat. And this is what brings me to my next point, which is Spire Global's space as a service is basically an amortized software as a service. And we all know that software as a service has really high margins. In the earnings call, it says that they are targeting 60% to 70% margins over the next 3 to 5 years. These are incredible margins. And the best thing about it is that AI can't help you build the satellites, right? The problem with SaaS right now, why there was such a big SaaS sell-off, is because everyone thinks that you can just vibe code your way into a SaaS product, which it might not be feasible, but there is some truth to it, right? There are a lot of products that you can think of that you might not be able to make the perfect version of it, but you'll make something close or something usable. So that is something really dangerous for those SaaS companies, and something that they have to keep in mind. But with Spire Global, you will get those SaaS margins without that fear of being replaced by AI. So there is a safety net. AI is not going to build your satellites for you. I want to talk about the tailwinds. Increased geopolitical instability and conflict. This is the biggest tailwind yet. So just not even mentioning Iran, right? Not even mentioning all those things. We see just the relationship between the US and the EU has strained significantly. You see the EU and NATO members are no longer as reliant on America for their security, right? For their military. And that basically means that even if in the future, if let's say a Democrat joins or kind of removes the policies of Trump, well, these countries are still worried that, we can't rely on America, because what if in 4 years another Republican comes in, or another person similar to Trump comes in? Then we need to save ourselves before crap hits the fan and America's not there to help us. But usually people say geopolitical instability is temporary, but geopolitical sentiment is not temporary, right? Once bitten, twice shy. In Chinese, there's a saying, if you failed me once, I won't trust you the next 100 times. You see increased military spend from likes of Germany, right? I think France said that they're going to start increasing their nuclear program again. You see all these increased spend. I think they said 2% of GDP, not annually, but they'll increase the military spend by 2%. I think that was Germany, but you'll have to fact check me on that. So this is incredibly amazing, right? Additionally, Spire Global also added a bunch, so this, we're focusing on just Europe, right? We also have to mention that Spire Global also added a bunch of different people that were veterans or retirees of the military or of the Department of Defense into their board of directors, even into their into their management. So here I just typed in the Gemini, Spire Global management and directors with experience in military or Department of Defense, or I guess Department of War now. So these two people just joined in January 2026, right? This person just joined like a week ago. Look, former senior executive of the Office of Directors of National Intelligence, right? Like, this person was in the army, right? Here's an admiral. This person, CEO of Airbus Defense and Space, board of directors, management team, right? I think there's some more Airbus people, Airbus veteran, Air Force, Navy, Army, right? So even though I'm really focused on this increased military spend in the EU or in Europe, we can't discount the fact that Spire Global is still leaning heavily into seeing the U.S. and the Department of War as a major customer. Next thing, insatiability of AI data needs. So everyone always compares the data, like the computer chip, right, GPU chips, as a shovel play. I think that Spire Global is in a position that is even better than a shovel play, because the thing about a shovel is you only really need one shovel, right? Just stick with the analogy, right? Obviously, if you have more shovels, you'll be able to dig more places, right? But eventually, there's like a limit to how many shovels you need. But Spire Global, in my opinion, it isn't. So the shovel play is like GPUs, right? GPU equals shovel. The thing about Spire, they provide data, and what data is actually data is the equivalent to the right of use for land, right? Basically, it's like a digging permit. What do I mean by that? AI models require data. You need data to train AI, right? And the thing about data is it changes every time you find it, right? There's more data coming out every single day. Spire Global satellites rotate around Earth. I think they said, I forgot how it was, like 108 satellites, and it sees every point X amount of times a day. But today's weather is different from yesterday's weather, which is different from last month's weather, which is different from last year's weather, which is different from all the years before that. And data keeps changing. In order to have a really good AI agent or an AI, model, you need to train on a crap ton of data, and the data cannot be stale. There's a saying that I've mentioned multiple times in my videos whenever I talk about Spire Global: garbage in, garbage out. If you feed something bad data, if you feed it stale data, if you don't feed it enough data, you're gonna get a crappy model. You're gonna get a crappy AI agent or whatever thing you're trying to train on. That's the importance of data in this AI revolution. Democratization of development is something that also ties into the insatiability of AI needs, right? Back then, maybe you would have one customer who would buy data, and then that customer will train it, create their own little SaaS, right, and then sell their software as a service to all these other consumers. Now that everyone and anyone can create some type of software, then you basically just expanded the TAM, the total addressable market of Spire Global, to everyone that has access to AI that wants to build something that might require data, right? I mentioned this in a previous video, how even Robinhood and their prediction markets, if you want to predict the weather, you could use Spire Global's data, their weather data, in order to try to give yourself an edge in those prediction markets, right? So even just the prediction markets alone, and the people that might want an edge on those prediction markets for the weather or for other things might use Spire Global's data, right? Let's see. Increased military spend, I already talked about that. Oh, this is also really cool. Spire Global gives you the data. And in this case, Spire Global's data is like a Lego, right? Where customers get to use Spire Global's data in so many different novel ways, and use it in different ways to, like, I don't know, maybe one person's looking at rice paddy farm moisture, or then someone else uses that rice paddy moisture to figure out the population decline or increase of a specific animal that lives in that rice paddy moisture. I don't know what it is, but the different use cases for Spire Global is Spire Global's data is basically being used by their customers, and it doesn't require Spire Global themselves to think of these use cases, right? You just have to get the building blocks, which is the data, and then it's up to their customers to use it in however they want. And being able to use the data in however you want is also a big plus that customers might need, right? You're not locked into a specific thing. And it also shows how unique and how useful Spire Global's data can be. And then for this, these were things that their customers actually did get Spire Global to create satellites for, right? These are things that Spire Global's customers requested from Spire Global, and Spire Global created the satellites that would be able to collect this type of data, and they launched it. And now the coolest thing is Spire Global now has these satellites that offer this type of data, and any of their customers can use it, right? And that, as I said before, this is basically expanding their moat because it increases the different types of data that Spire Global has access to. Spire Global can just sell that data to that person. They don't have to build the satellite again. Which again, also another note, when I say build a satellite, it doesn't come out of Spire Global's own. It doesn't cost Spire Global to build that satellite other than labor, right? Most of the material, I think all the materials are paid for by the customer. That's what I remember. So that is another thing, right? So Spire Global is relatively capital light, but it does require like a lot of research and all those things which cost money. Okay, so those were all the bullish things. I do want to note two things, right? We'll talk about this one first. Positive cash flow. This is really important to look at. So the thing about positive cash flow is in the earnings call, their CFO says that we are targeting quarterly adjusted EBITDA break even fourth quarter of 2026 to the first quarter of 2027 timeframe. So the problem with this, right? Maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but in their Q3 earnings call, they actually said that the company is in the process of completing whatever, right? Adjusted operating cash flow break even deposit by no later than Q4 2026. So they in this case they kind of just increased or delayed, potentially delayed the quarter in which they will be break even deposited. So that is something I want to point out and something to be aware of, right? They basically just subtly increased the time frame in which we would have to wait for positive cash flow or break even. I mean, this could also be one quarter's break even and one quarter is positive. That's another thing as well, but that's just something to take note of. And the last thing I want to talk about is this, right? So the thing that we have to be aware of is that even though there's all these tailwinds, right? Even though everything is a positive, right? Everything looks like a positive for Spire Global. It still depends on company execution, right? So they are in talks with a lot of governments and customers, but can they continue their execution, right? They've been executing and they've been succeeding, right? But can they continue, right? And obviously this is a risk, right? Every single company has an execution risk, right? So that is, I mean, it's kind of useless for me to say, but like it depends on their execution, right? I mean, every company, it depends on their execution, but that's still, I just want to remind everyone that even though there's all these tailwinds, right? Even though there's all these things that are positives, that are pluses for Spire Global and are safety nets for Spire Global, right? This is still really important to monitor. So yeah, that's my analysis of Spire Global's earnings call, ticker symbol SPIR. I remain invested in this. This was a really high conviction play, and now it's just everything is looking up, right? They did encounter a lot of hiccups, right? Especially with the Kepler deal falling through, and then them suing them, and then them getting it back. Which, honestly, I have a conspiracy theory. I don't have some foil with me, even though I'm in the kitchen. I'm too lazy to find it. But I would not be surprised if they purposely did that so that some bank could get extra shares in Spire Global's company, because that's just some bullshit. They canceled the day it was supposed to go through, and then and then they got it in the future, and I don't know. But that's my analysis on the earnings call of Spire Global, ticker symbol SPIR. If you're in it, if you bought recently before the earnings call, congrats. Otherwise, I remain holding it. My position hasn't really changed because I'm already overexposed to a microcap. And yeah, that's it. Have a good day. Peace.